is a presentation of the Path Cable Television Network.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight we've invited a celebrity co-host to introduce you to the head of the Santa Barbara Theater of the Handicapped, an extremely productive organization in which he takes a very active role. My co-host tonight, one of my favorite actors, one of my favorite producers of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, The China Syndrome. My pleasure to have on the show Mr. Michael Douglas. And Michael has a guest, Mr. Rod Lathim from the Santa Barbara Theater of the Handicapped. And you found time to get involved with this, and you found time to carry the gauntlet for something of this magnitude. I'm going to let you guys go at it, because I want to hear what's going on.
I don't know how much earlier, but about 2 years ago, I was in semi-retirement in Santa Barbara, and Rod called one day. I didn't know him, and he introduced himself and invited me to see a rehearsal of a show he was doing. I think it was Through Our Eyes.
Right.
It was. And sort of trying to keep one's privacy and not being as involved as one should in the community, I thought it'd be nice to see what's going on. So I went out to see this rehearsal, and I was knocked out. It was an extraordinary experience, a mixture of younger students and some older people, a mixture of physical disabilities, as well as other handicaps. And I just could not believe how good this show was. And so I became a supporter of Rod's group, and 2 years later, and probably 4 or 5 productions later, all of them original productions, except for one written or staged, directed by Rod and some friends. And each one of the shows has continued to maintain an extraordinary level of quality and originality. They're all original shows. And so I've been very pleased and happy to be a part of it. As far as how Rod started the whole theater, which I guess now is called the Access Theater.
Right.
Right. Why don't you say how you began it?
Well, in 1979, I got a call from the city of Santa Barbara. Actually, I went in for a job interview and got a call and got the job as a music and dance therapist to work with developmentally disabled clients in some kind of a performing situation. And out of that 5-month job came our first show called Circus of Life. And when that show was over, my job was over. And I decided that I wanted to go on with it. The public reaction from the show, which was an original musical review featuring a cast of 65 developmentally disabled and physically disabled children and adults, opened at the Libero Theatre in Santa Barbara in May of '79, and closed to a very enthusiastic crowd wanting more. So instead of going and working at a fast food restaurant, which I should have done because I was broke, I wrote another show called Through Our Eyes, and that was a show that Michael saw for the first time. And during the production of Through Our Eyes, I could see that the interest in the community was there, and definitely the interest as far as the disabled population in Santa Barbara was there, to have an accessible community theater where people who had not previously had any experience in theater or any kind of drama workshops could get involved and learn and grow and develop a part of themselves that many of them didn't really realize that they had. So during that process of Through Our Eyes, Santa Barbara Theater of the Handicapped was developed. And we gave it the name and made it official. And since that time, 3 years ago, we've grown into a totally accessible community theater serving the whole community, disabled and non-disabled individuals, in workshops and classes and shows.
When you said that the general public sort of embraced it immediately, were you surprised? I know you were pleased, but were you surprised? Pleased.
I was surprised because the whole idea of theater with people who are labeled handicapped is a relatively new thing for the public to be exposed to. And in a society that is now fortunately changing for the better and accepting people with handicaps and with disabilities much more readily, But at the same time, they tend to stereotype people. And so it was a little scary. We really didn't know what kind of reaction. Our first initial reactions with the first two shows oftentimes were that of joy, and there were a lot of tears in the audience. That sometimes bothered me because I didn't want people coming out of pity. I wanted them to come and enjoy the talent that they were going to see. And I'm happy to say now that we have a real strong following of people who are still surprised with what they see, but are also very accepting. We throw the handicaps out the window, right, and we work with talent and abilities.
I think the key, is hard for Rod to speak about it as his own shows and director, is that they're great theater. The success of the shows, in the last show, which is the Libero Theatre, how many seats is the Libero?
About 700.
700 seats, which was sold out for like five nights,
wow,
is based on a reputation of it's a really good night at the theater. And that was one of the things that made me take such an interest, because that was the most important. So you very quickly get over any sort of shadings of like either feeling sentimental or for the wrong feelings of why you're there, except to see a wonderful show, very, very well performed. And what has happened is that he's been able, I think Rod's been able to maintain this level of quality with each show, and now has built this foundation of community support, which looks like it's going to be ongoing for a while.
I think it's interesting to note, too, that you've come up with original material as opposed to the handicapped version of Tiny Alice or the handicapped version of
right,
the Zoo Story.
Yeah.
All this, as is evident by the posters in back of Rod, that this is all original material from all the posters directed by you. But what about the people that write these? Are they themselves physically challenged? Or are they adaptations of plays that you've gone, okay, well, we can put this person in a chair and maybe this person can have some other challenge?
Right.
How did it come about?
Well, the writing of the scripts and the developing of the content of all of our shows comes heavily from input from our people who are in the shows. We have ongoing workshops and classes, and in these workshops and classes, and also in interviews and auditions and actual production of shows, we are constantly getting ideas and input from people as to what they would like to do, roles they'd like to play, challenges they would like to have in the theater, whether it be something to do with choreography or drama or comedy or music. The last play is a good example. Stage Struck was an original musical which really had absolutely nothing to do with anybody who was handicapped. The show could actually be produced by any theater group, whether they had handicapped people in them, their company or not. We did happen to have about 10 people in the cast who were in one way or another disabled. But the scripts don't dwell on the handicaps. They dwell on characters or whatever else that any other script would dwell on. The second show we did, Through Our Eyes, did deal with, in a very realistic way, the emotions and the reactions of people who are labeled handicapped and how they feel about being called handicapped, what their definition of the word was. And the show was a grouping of vignettes of actual occurrences, experiences that people that we were working with had in being stereotyped or outcast or treated in some way differently because they were quote-unquote handicapped. In many cases, it was a very powerful show, not only for the performers to really get out and have a chance to say, this has happened to me, but at the same time, we didn't want to cram it down people's throats and say, look what's happening. It was done hopefully in a sensitive way so that people were not turned off by it, but enlightened to the fact that, wow, yeah, I might have done that to somebody one time.
There's a public service spot that's on the air now that it's pretty hard-hitting, but it does get a point across, and that's somebody parks in a parking place for the handicapped, and the handicapped person in a chair comes by, and the voiceover announcement was, you don't want to put yourself in their place. Okay. The fact is that, Michael, I learned before we went on the air that you, years ago, on stage, played the part of a disabled person, so you did have a little understanding prior to your going to the Santa Barbara Theater of the Handicapped, and in actually having put yourself in that place.
Well, that's true, since I also, besides playing the part was able to receive a lot of in-depth characterizations from the author, Mr. Yarima.
Yes.
Whose script was somewhat autobiographical, and was very supportive and helpful. But being the selfish performer that I am, my involvement when it first came with the Santa Barbara Theater, the handicap, was just simply based on the quality of their work and the extraordinary community response. One of the things I think you can feel after every show, and I dragged Paul Williams, who's a friend of mine, lives in Santa Barbara, and another musician, took them to the show, and it was really fun because they were going, oh, you know, okay, fine, Michael, go see the show. You know, somebody's involved, and what happens is, almost by the end of the show, with the curtain call and that sense of it being community theater where the performers come out, and Rod comes out and he talks to the audience, that you see this natural breakdown of any sort of restrictions or sort of attitudes that one might have, either looking the other way and not knowing how to deal with somebody that's either in a chair or has an obvious physical disability. And it's just broken down, and it's done such wonders for the community. I think Rod has finally developed it so he's writing, or has just written a book, which is possibly going to be more of a text for other possible community organizations that could develop similar groups, which is a good idea.
Well, I think that all a handicapped person wants to do is be able to communicate as a whole human being.
Right.
And what a wonderful opportunity for them to do that on stage and running the gamut of emotions. But I have to ask you, can anybody get involved? Do you have auditions? I mean, you have to have some talent coming in the door, I'd presume, to get the notoriety that your group does have.
We have open auditions, which are open to the whole community. In fact, we've had people involved in shows from outside of Santa Barbara that have commuted in from the Ventura area and from the North County. In fact, the name of the book is called Open Auditions, and that we do have for each show. And we see new faces each show. We also see people coming back to do shows again. But they are open to anyone, regardless of whether you have a handicap or not. I think we all have handicaps anyway. But
speak for yourself.
But they are open, and yes, anybody can get involved. We have a limited space. The last auditions we had about 85 people come for a 25 cast show, and we had to turn some people away. But we have a lot of really strong community support and volunteers as far as building sets and transporting people and being mobility aids and promoting ticket sales and everything else. So there's a lot of different ways for the community to be involved in the theater. And that's one of the reasons why I think we're such a tight-knit group, is that we get the whole community involved on one level or another. And it's a real family affair.
I'll do a little turnabout with my co-host, Michael Douglas, and sort of put the shoe on the other foot and ask if producers are starting to become aware of the abilities and capabilities of the handicapped actor. More to the point, if there is a part for somebody confined to the chair, are they starting to read handicapped actors as opposed to an able-bodied person who might be mobile in a chair?
I don't think so. No. And it's a difficult question. There's really two sides to it. Because as an actor, one is, and if one's a good actor, you can portray anything, whether you are actually handicapped or not. You know, you learn. So that's a really a tricky question, and I don't really know if it's the responsibility of the role in this most professional, in movies, that that has to be a requirement. But I think that certainly the work of PATH and other organizations have made the consciousness awareness much better. And I would think that not so much in the performing areas, but certainly in the technical and any craft area, the ability of anybody who has a so-called disability.
It wasn't a loaded question.
It's fairly loaded.
Well, it wasn't intended to be loaded. But I look at commercials. A student of commercials. I do a lot of commercials. And I would I go into a fast food restaurant and I'll see somebody there in a chair and don't think a whole lot about it. And then I'll see the commercial for the same restaurant on television, and the handicapped person is obvious by their absence. Well, wait a minute. If this person come and patronize your restaurant, why can't they, on the other hand, be spokespeople for your restaurant in an advertising campaign? So are you directing some of your actors to pursue professional acting, to go try and read for some spots, to go try to read for various roles in motion pictures and television?
Our overall goal is not necessarily to find jobs in the professional world of acting, whether it be in television or theater or movies. We do like to think that we are training them and giving them the incentive to go on to pursue that if they would like to. I know PATH has a major focus of training people specifically for television and for theater work. And in fact, one of our actors or actresses attended workshops for about 12 weeks with PATH, having worked with us. So we do send them on and encourage them when the interest is there. I think that the benefit of our program is surrounded by the fact that for most of the people that are involved with us, it's their first time on stage, and they haven't even begun to think about the fact that, you know, maybe someday I could do this as a profession. It's more of a learning and a developing.
Getting enough courage to get up on stage for just watching some of the rehearsals. Was amazed to see the growth personalities of some people who've been self-conscious about the disability, you know, publicly, and all of a sudden have to be up on a stage where everybody's looking at them, and overcoming that it's extraordinary, watching the kind of confidence that it builds in them.
I suppose a theatrical director has to be a little bit of a psychologist as well under any circumstance.
Theater is 90% psychology and 10% art. I feel.
Even the same at your theater as well?
Any theater. I think that, and I've said this many times, that I've had more problems with non-disabled actors than I have with disabled actors. When you're dealing with something in stage work where everything has to be that right there, right then, and you've got a live audience, it can be it's just very demanding, and egos can often get in the way. But I'm happy to say that in community theater, they don't get in the way as much. But I have had my share of run-ins with people who come in and let their egos get bigger than their ability. But it's interesting to watch how much psychology goes on. We're not a therapeutic theater. We're not out to do therapy, although a lot of it happens, and a lot of it happens in any theater. But I had to laugh because I was just having a conversation last week with a director about very similar problems of just having to deal with people first, and then having to deal with putting on a show. In our case, a lot of this director is doing a theater in Vail, Colorado right now, a very professional theater, and she's amazed that I can work with deaf people and hearing people and people in wheelchairs all at the same time. She said she'd go nuts. And I said, well, I don't think you would if you really gave it a try. It's not that difficult. We do adapt. We use interpreters, and I've learned to sign to where I can direct in sign language and make my way through. And if you just kind of put all those physical things that you see in front of you away and just deal with the people, it's just like any other theater.
When you were first offered the opportunity to do this, though, I mean, it was the choice between the fast restaurant and this.
Right.
What went through your mind? I mean, were you a little bit frightened, a little bit apprehensive?
I have to admit that opening night of the first show, I was a little bit on edge. I had 3 cast members run away 5 minutes before the curtain. And that was a real experience, running down State Street after my actors. I had 65 in the show, though, so I figured if I last 3, I could still do the show, and the show went fine. Yes, I was hesitant, and I was a little bit apprehensive as to how it would all go over. I was apprehensive as to how the audience would react. I'm no longer apprehensive or hesitant, and I constantly thank my lucky stars that I'm doing something that I love and somehow making a living at it. And I wouldn't do anything other than this.
Michael, the audience seems receptive from what we've heard from both of you. As far as the caliber of the acting, has it improved since you've become a patron, with or without your influence? But
Yeah.
has over the time that you've watched it, you've obviously seen it grow, which must be very pleasing to you.
It's a good question. There are 2 or 3 actresses who have been in more than 1 or 2 of the show, and I'm thinking of
Teresa.
Teresa, who sings,
Right.
and you worked with her. I don't know her particular disability, but it was very difficult for her to take a large breath,
Right.
right? To take any breath, and to watch Teresa learn to sing. Was extraordinary, and just seeing her getting more and more, and her voice getting stronger and stronger. So there are some personal actors, performers, who it's been a pleasure to watch, and be they disabled or not, the ones all of a sudden you see have a bent to comedy, and are really start getting more and more comfortable with it. But by and large, what always is amazing, I really don't know what the secret that Rod has, and I think it might have to do with psychology if he put that much percentage in it, is that it never fails that no matter who he has, and I watch a lot of these older, younger, for the first time perform, and the level is always the same. I mean, it's good. It's really, really good. And to see them, I try to see the shows now like on the last night of a 4 or 5 night, because they're hot by then. These, you know, they got the chairs, they're wheeling the chairs. And one of the things Ryan talked about is when you have like a curtain move, you know, and the chairs, and all of a sudden it's long the first day, it takes a little while, and then by the 4th night they're getting much quicker and everything. It's wonderful to watch.
You talked about your initial exposure. You got a phone call. It somehow tickled something in your imagination and your curiosity, and you went. And now you're a veteran observer
Right.
of the Santa Barbara Theater of the Handicapped. What advice do you have to first-nighters who have never been to this sort of theater? How do you watch this sort of production, Michael?
Well, the secret is to get them there. I mean, once you're there, then it's I mean, they melt. Anybody, and you know, you'll see parents who come who are very worried, who have a disabled child who's and they have to deal with their own problems in terms of what they've been keeping in closets and restricted. All of a sudden, you watch a parent go through being so nervous to being overprotective of their child to this beaming support. But for the general audience member, I think once you're there, that's the whole battle, because then the show takes care of itself, and you realize that you're not there because of your civic duty or to feel sorry for anybody. You're there to see a hot night in the theater and have a lot of fun, and that I realize this all the time. Rod is the reason that I support it. Plus the other, but it's very good theater, and the community response. In other words, when you're doing a production where there are people from the community working together, it creates a very special feeling between each other rather than just some performance from the outside. And I think that's something that Rod cultivates very well.
So don't go to the theater if you're expecting something other than good theater, a good time, and a sense of community.
Yes.
Sort of wraps it up. What's coming up, Rod? Anything in production now?
Yes, we have a show in production called Finger Talk, which is a new review in sign language. It'll feature a cast of 9 hearing and deaf performers who all perform in sign language. And we have voice interpreting from the actual performers on stage. We'll be touring that show in November and December of this year. And we'll be hopefully touring. We're going to be bringing back Stage Struck, which the poster is behind us here, at the Libero Theatre in March of '83 for a second run. We're going to add some new songs to it. And if our funding comes through, which is always something we wait around for with our fingers crossed, we're going to hopefully tour with Stage Struck and keep going. We don't see an end to it, fortunately.
What about those that want to get involved? Now, there are 2 ways to get involved, by the way, folks, either as an actor or as a patron, I would imagine.
Oh, yes.
We should hit on both.
If I can give you the address in Santa Barbara, it's 2428 Chapala, Chapala, for those people who don't live in Santa Barbara, 93105, and the phone number is area code 682-8184. Give us a call, and we'd love to hear from you.
Rod, that's terrific. And I want to thank you, Rod Lathim of the Santa Barbara Theater of the Handicapped, for being our guest, and wish him Godspeed and good luck in your future efforts.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Handicapped, and Michael, thank you very much for being with us and for introducing us to Rod and for taking the time away from your schedule to come here and do this. And I hope we have you back.
Thank you.
I want to thank you all for a wonderful evening, for your participation, for your interest in the Santa Barbara Theater of the Handicapped. I'm Lee Marshall. Good night, everybody.